Welcome to GaySpot. It's our monthly webinar from LGB Alliance. I'm James, I'm your host and quizmaster this evening. So as it's LGBT History Month, we're doing something a little bit different. We can do this as a bit of a pub quiz. We're looking at a variety of topics from LGB history, and you'll get to answer the questions as we go along as well. So to start with, I'm going to introduce our pub quiz team, or our panel for this evening. So first up is writer and broadcaster, a member of the Worldwide Power 100 list in 2012, one of Britain's top 300 intellectuals, according to The Observer, and described by Margaretta Jolly as a heartthrob of the women's liberation movement's lesbian scene. Please welcome Beatrix Campbell. Beatrix, want to pop your camera on? Hello. Next up, much loved actor we've all followed since the days of Notting Hill and Gimme Gimme, through to last year's hit movie Supernova, constantly deboosted by Critter, and according to Pink News, everything he does backfires spectacularly. I think how wrong they are. Welcome, James Dreyfus. Good evening.
No, they're right. They're absolutely right.
And then keeping us on the straight and narrow this evening, or maybe not so straight, is the former governor of Scotland's only women's prison, not HMP Larkhall, and former Scottish Government advisor on nursing and quality. She's a lesbian feminist activist who now spends a lot of her time telling people why it's wrong to allow men into women's spaces. Good evening, Rona Hotchkiss.
Hi. Hello.
And finally, an author and historian who specializes in Black British heritage and gay culture. He's also written about gay men's lives in Fighting Proud and Playing Gay in the Golden Age of British television. Writer Russell T. Davies describes him as one of the soldiers, gatekeepers and champions of our community. He's our resident historian for this evening. Good evening, Stephen Bourne. So good evening, panel, or should I say pub quiz team. As we're a pub quiz, let's find out what everyone's specialist subjects are on the quiz front. I guess, Stephen, you're going to be our historian, but is there anything else you consider your specialist subject in a pub quiz?
I would say, I know this is going to sound really sad, but I've been watching it since Martha Longhurst had a heart attack in the Rovers, Coronation Street.
Anyone else with a specialist subject or special interest they think is going to help them out tonight on what we're covering? Rona, what have you got for us?
So I think my specialist subject is probably Scottish international football, 1920 to 2020, the wilderness years.
I think there might be one on that. I'm not sure. Steve.
Well, mine's obviously astrophysics. Of course.
I'm trying to remember, we've got a gay astrophysics question coming up. James, what do you consider your specialist subject?
Horror and thriller films from the 1970s, which will be of no use whatsoever tonight. So I'm not going to be much help to you unless it involves taking a Pelham 123 or Halloween.
Well, we'll see what comes up. So that's our pub quiz team. So for those of you who are watching this live, we're going to run the series of questions as the pop-up polls in Zoom. So you'll be able to select your answer on the screen. I'll read the question out. The panel will talk a bit about what they think the answer might be. We'll reveal the answer, and then we'll chat about that topic for a bit before we move on to the next question. So if everyone has their drink from the bar and they're ready to go, we'll start with question 1, if I can bring that up. So first question, what is the Gay Spot? So this webinar series is called the Gay Spot. What was the Gay Spot? Was it the first LGB program on BBC Radio, the first gay nightclub on Canal Street, the nickname of the home of lesbian activist Ruth Ellis, slang for being able to spot someone is gay, or the original title for Grindr? Panel, any thoughts?
Can we say now?
Yeah, what do you think?
I haven't got a clue, but I like B, the first gay nightclub on Canal Street, because it's near Weatherfield.
Okay. Any other thoughts, panel?
I'm pretty sure it's C. So it's
Oh, right.
it's called the Gay Spot, and it's actually not excluding lesbians in any way. It's a place that Ruth Ellis in New York, I think, might not be New York, can't remember, opened as a sort of a home for lesbians and gay people to congregate and meet. I'm pretty sure it's C.
It is. So we've ended the poll. 65% of everyone watching has said C as well. They've agreed with your owner. If you've watched our previous couple of webinars, you'll have hopefully heard that we've talked about Ruth Ellis and her partner. Yeah, it was in Detroit. They were a black lesbian couple. They kind of had parties at their house because black gay couples weren't welcome in the white gay bars, and they weren't welcome in the straight black bars. But they also did a lot to kind of support the community generally, providing like books and food and college tuition even reading up today, which is really interesting. Is any of you familiar with Ruth Ellis and the Gay Spot prior to this kind of webinar series?
It's the webinar series that did it for me, because I thought, well, what is this? It obviously isn't Canal Street, and it isn't any of the other things that are on the list. So you are the ones who drew our attention to it, I think. It's a great story.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story.
Brilliant story.
Okay. So
I did know that. I didn't contribute because I thought I'd leave it all up to Rona, but I did know that.
Okay. So, question 2. In what year did, I'll launch that so everyone else can see it. In what year did the UK's first gay pub open? It's called the Cave of the Golden Calf. Was that 1912? 1924, 1958, 1971, or 1983? How long ago do we think the first?
I think I know.
I'm
Am I allowed to say?
Yeah, what do you think it is?
I think it's 1912.
I think it's 1912.
Yeah.
I was going to say 1912.
Mm-hmm.
Because Elsa Lanchester's was the Cave of Harmony, wasn't it, in the 20s?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it opened as a gay pub or was a pub and became frequented by gay people and known as that, but I'm pretty sure it's the 1912 answer.
Yeah.
Well, if you look
I think one of the first barmaids was Bev Jackson.
So 38% of the audience went for 1924. 19% of you went for 1912. The correct answer is 1912. It was the first, so well done to the panel for getting that. It was the first gay bar in the modern sense. It was just off Regent Street. It was opened as kind of an avant-garde artistic venture. There's still, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Edinburgh Festival. There's still part of Edinburgh Festival that has part of that event that's called the Cave of the Golden Calf. Well, based or named from that. Okay, cracking through. Next question. Okay, so which show featured the first lesbian kiss on television? Was it A, LA Law between Amanda Donohoe and Michelle Green? B, Girl between Alison Steadman and Myra Francis? C, Brookside between Anna Friel and Nicole Stevenson? D, Ellen between Ellen DeGeneres and Laura Dern? Or E, Roseanne between Sandra Bernhard and Morgan Fairchild? Any of the team fans of any of those shows?
It's got to be, depends where it is. If it was Britain, it's got to be Brookside.
No, it wasn't. It was Girl, 1974.
What?
Well, if you look, it's Alison Steadman, so it must be going back a bit. No disrespect to Alison, but it must be going back much further than Brookside.
But the question might be wrong, because in 1967, BBC did Maidens in Uniform with Francesca Annis and Virginia McKenna, but it doesn't exist. They didn't record it, but they may have kissed.
Actually,
we don't know, because early British television, a lot of it was live.
It was actually question time when Anne Widdecombe slid off her seat in an attempt to sexualise herself, snogged Theresa May. I'm telling you.
Well, that wasn't an answer we had as an option. So just half of the audience have gone for Brookside. The correct answer was B, Girl.
It was B.
It was B.
No.
I actually found it. I found it in the archives. I screened it twice at the NFT. Sold out both times.
Yeah. So Brookside first before the Watershed. in 1994. LA law was actually earlier than that in 1991. The other two were kind of later 90s, and I don't think actually featured the kiss between the couples in those ones. But yeah, Stephen, you're saying it's difficult to tell.
Well, actually, just a point of order. Brookside screened the lesbian kiss in the weekdays and then cut it for the Saturday omnibus. And when I complained to that stupid man who ran Channel 4, he sent me this horrible letter saying, shut up. Can't think of his name, but one of those big wigs at Channel 4. Jeremy Isaacs. No, it wasn't him. It was the one after him. I've still got the letter.
We were chatting the other day, Stephen, you said about, and I think you were touching on it there, about this is, as far as we know, the first lesbian kiss on television. Because
on British, yeah.
With things that weren't recorded, they were just going out live. So, I mean, there's things we probably would have heard about, but there's a lot of our history we're not aware of, because if it's something that went out live television and wasn't recorded, there's not the archive for people like yourself to have found and discovered and shared.
No, someone needs to do more research, because Francesca Annis and Virginia McKenna are still alive. I mean, I haven't got around to writing to them, but someone should, just to find out the content of that play.
You must. It is urgent. You must. We all want to see it. We want to see it.
Oh, I've already written the book on the subject. I'm exhausted.
Good plug.
Okay, yeah. So, we'll move on to question 4. I hope everyone can see that on screen. So, question 4. In 2011, a UK court ruled in favour of a gay couple, Martin Hall and Stephen Preddy. What was the subject of their case? Was it A, owners of a bed and breakfast refused to provide them with a double room? B, a bakery refused to make their wedding cake? C, their marriage certificate from South Africa was not recognised when they returned to the UK? D, they worked together and were fired when their relationship was discovered? Or E, door staff at a nightclub refused them entry unless they were each with a woman? So, any of those cases ring any bells for any of the...
B. I mean, B does.
B
does in that time.
Yeah.
And A does as well.
Yeah, it does.
Pretty sure it was A, but it didn't happen like that. What happened was they actually got into the B&B and the duvet cover and the curtains didn't match, so they stormed out.
It's actually true. I read it in The Guardian.
70%.
I'm going with Rona on this one. I think she's right.
70% of everyone watching went for A, that the owners of the B&B refused to provide them with a double room. That is the correct answer, is A. We are obviously where there was a case about a bakery refusing a wedding cake. There's also been cases where, in different countries where equal marriage was recognised, had arrived before here, you might return home and your wedding, your marriage certificate might not be valid. So they're all kind of examples of things that are potentially out there. Are any of the panel familiar with any of those sorts of cases in real life, or that sort of discrimination?
Well, I do remember. People outside policing the queue outside Heaven, and they used to turn people away if they thought you were straight and trying to get in. So I remember people picking them out of the queue, saying, you're with a girl, so you can't come in. And they were like, whatever. And you're thinking, obviously they're gay, let them in. But that used to happen all the time.
Yeah.
They could have done an opposite to one the police does. The police make you walk a straight line to see if you're drunk. They can make you walk a straight line, and if you manage to stay on it, you're definitely straight, so you can bugger off. Baby shark.
Yeah. I mean, the answer to the real answer to this question, the B&B one, my parents had a bed and breakfast when we were growing up, so kind of it's one I'd kind of heard the story and thought, I'm sure we've it's not something I've noticed necessarily, but I'm sure we'd had 2 men or 2 women stay, and we had double rooms, so it kind of was kind of shocking almost to get refused. But I guess it depends on the B&B owner, or did.
Do you remember having to? I remember very distinctly having to call if I was going on holiday, I always had to call the hotel beforehand and ask them if they had a problem with it. And 80% of the time they'd say, no, not at all. But about 20% of the time it was, this might not be the best place to stay. I remember doing that religiously every time I went to a hotel, is just asking. Isn't it strange? I mean,
brave.
Yeah.
Very brave.
Okay, well, I think we're ready for question 5. I'll pop on the screen. So, who is known as the mother of pride? Is it A, Marsha P. Johnson, B, Brenda Howard, C, Stormy DeLavery, D, Judy Garland, or E, Cher?
It's got to be Judy Garland. If it's not, it bloody well should be.
No, it's C. It's C. It's
C.
C.
So why do we think it's
C.
why do we think it's Judy Garland, Stephen?
She's a gay icon, and she died, and they rioted because she died, and that's how Stonewall was born.
Who else had a different answer? Someone said C.
C, definitely.
C.
Drag queen, wasn't it?
No,
it's
no.
I don't know. I only know British history. I don't know American.
Okay, well,
the Barbara woman.
People, it's C.
So
C.
let's see what the audience voted.
Oh.
So just over half of the audience voted for C, Stormy DeLavery, and then a bit of a mix on everyone else. The actual correct answer is B, Brenda Howard.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think she organised the first ever Pride, didn't she, in New York in 1970? Was it one? I can't remember. But she was. I think she was a Jewish woman who had been a feminist and sort of an activist for years, and she organised the first ever Pride.
Yeah. So it's the questions about the mother of Pride as opposed to the Stonewall riots, which obviously Pride came a year later. So Brenda Howard, she's a bisexual rights activist and feminist. She coordinated the first rally, and at that point that was called the Christopher Street Liberation Day March. And there were 3 of them that year, the year after the Stonewall riots. So it was a commemorative march for Stonewall. But I think this is one of those areas of LGB history that there's lots of myths around, and people have heard different stories. In terms of Stonewall riots itself, there's the who threw the first brick myth, which a lot of people think Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha said on recorded interviews wasn't even there till hours after it all kicked off. I think the reason most of us would have gone for C, for Stormy DeLavery, is she was the lesbian bouncer who was kind of being shuffled into the police car and kind of shouted, "Why isn't anyone doing anything?" which kind of was seen as the trigger for the riots. But again, it's another one similar to the TV stuff that Stephen was saying. There's lots of accounts of what's happened, and we know some of the things that didn't happen, but a lot was happening that night. There's not an exact, no one stood there filming it on their phone like there is today. So, a lot happened that wouldn't have gone unnoticed. But I don't know how surprised are any of you with that, in terms of, is that a name you've heard of before? I mean, Rowan, obviously you knew.
No, I think that's fascinating. You see, this evening is useful even for that purpose.
Okay, we'll move on to question 6. So question 6, news reporter, actress and lesbian rights activist Jackie Foster played lacrosse for which country? Was A, Canada, B, England, C, India, D, Australia, or E, Scotland?
I'd say Canada, because she did go to Canada.
Yeah.
She's a lovely, lovely lady. I knew her very well, and but I don't think she was Canadian, but she did spend a lot of time there. I would say Canada.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, final answer from the panel for most of the panel. Canada. Still voting, just about there. Okay, I'm going to end that one. So, audience 44% said Canada, 24% said Scotland, 24%.
Oh, she was Scottish.
Correct. So, Rona, I think you enthusiastically flagged there, giving everyone a clue.
She was Scottish, of course. Jacqueline Mackenzie.
Yeah, and she went to St Leonard's School in St Andrews, which at the time was probably the most exclusive girls' boarding school in Scotland, being as it was in St Andrews. And I only know that because I had a friend who went there shortly after Jackie Forster, so that's how I know.
So it was Scotland. So I missed that. It was Scotland.
Sure.
I should have realised because her name was Mackenzie.
Yes, it was.
Jackie Bush is a TV star in the 50s. Jackie Mackenzie.
Forster was her married name, I think. So yeah.
So she was born in India, in British India, and then she eventually did move to Canada before moving back to London, I think. I have to admit, this isn't a name I was familiar with. I think I'm looking up stuff that Chris knew more about.
Oh, she was sensational because, well, one, she was gorgeous. She had fantastic grey hair. She had a voice like Fenella, what's her name?
Fielding.
But it wasn't quite as kind of madly camp. It was just exquisitely posh. And she, you know, you could find her at the gateways. You could find her in, she made this wonderful transition between gay politics before women's liberation. And then when women's liberation happened, which is the context in which I met her, she just kind of relished all of that. And so she was a radical with a really generous, nice,
heart. Yeah,
lovely, welcoming. I just thought she was adorable, adorable.
Can I just say one thing? She invited me to give a talk for Sappho when there was still in London, in a pub in London, and I gave a presentation, more like an informal thing, and she said, "You're the first gay man we've ever allowed in." And I was like, yeah, because I love to break down barriers. This was in the 90s, early 90s, sorry, because she passed away, I think 1996.
Even my partner thinks it was in the Chepstow in London, the Chepstow bar pub, because she was actually there.
I can't remember. I know the pub was over the Waterloo Bridge.
For those who are watching you won't know what Sappho was, do you want to just explain what Sappho was?
It was the first, first lesbian, second lesbian after Arena 3 was the second lesbian sort of publication and social group and so on, I think. Obviously, I'm far too young to know about it, but Bev Jackson was there.
I was only 7 when I went there as a guest speaker. She was a diamond, and as Beatrice says, she was all embracing. She didn't exclude people because of their sexuality or exclude anyone. You know, she embraced everyone. She was wonderful.
Yeah, she was.
And she was in the film The Dam Busters.
Oh shit!
She was an actress. She was an actress originally.
She was, yeah.
She played the canteen lady in The Dam Busters.
And on a war theme, we'll move on to question 7 because that's related. So question 7, Second World War RAF Wing Commander Ian Gleed is notable for what? Was it A, he was the first serviceman to be discharged during the war for being gay? Was it B, he was the secret lover of Prince George, Duke of Kent? C, he was the last pilot who served during the war to be court-martialed for being gay? D, he was honoured twice for bravery by King George VI? Or E, he published the largest collection of love letters between 2 gay servicemen? So I feel Stephen's going to know this one, so maybe if the others want to let us know what they think first.
There's a picture of him in my book, so I'll back off this one.
Yeah.
I'll go with whatever Beatrix and Rona say.
D.
What were you going to say, B?
D.
All right, okay. I was going to say C, but I really don't have a clue. Don't have a clue.
It wasn't court-martialed. No. It's D.
D.
It's D.
Okay, go with
D.
D from the team. Okay.
D.
So fairly split from the results from the audience. So 35% of you is the only just ahead with 35% of you thinking it was E, that he published the largest collection of love letters between two gay servicemen. The correct answer is D. He was twice honoured for bravery by King George VI. Stephen, this is your specialist subject area, so do you want to tell us a little bit about him? And
yeah, he joined. He learned to be a pilot before the war. British, obviously, come from a sort of well-to-do-ish background. Became a pilot before the war, and then when the war broke out, he just got stuck in and was bailed out of his Spitfire many times, and was a real hero and greatly respected in the RAF, and was awarded the two highest honours that he could have been by George VI at Buckingham Palace, and then sadly was killed in action in 1943. But we didn't know about his sexuality, although he was sexually active with other men. It was all very much in quiet until the 1990s, when one of his lovers, who was in the RAF, spoke quite openly about their relationship during the war in the RAF in a BBC television documentary, when the campaign to lift the ban had taken off, and the BBC did a television program about it. So my little ears pricked up when I found that out, and just done more research about him.
Yeah, it's a kind of, looking up for stuff for the quiz, it's a fascinating area. You kind of don't think of that kind of period of history. Obviously more recently with lifting of bans for being male, lesbian in the military kind of thing, you don't think of it as even being a thing where you would be able to be gay or out. But I mean, from what you've written in your book, there's quite a mix, isn't there, of the experiences that people in same-sex relationships would have had during the war. If there
was an unofficial turning a blind eye, Gay men were still cashiered and thrown in prison, lost their livelihoods in the armed services, but many didn't, because of the deaths, the casualties that there were during the war. And so the government and the military just turned a blind eye in some cases, in probably more cases than we would ever understand. And so there was this integration, and it kind of, somebody, not me, but somebody did say that it possibly sowed the seeds towards the decriminalization or partial decriminalization in 1967, because a lot of the straight men that served alongside the gay men in the RAF, particularly in the Navy and the Army, had their eyes opened. They were enlightened from that time, so they weren't as hostile. I mean, there was that period in the 50s. It's more complex than I'm making it sound. But when I wrote my book, I was delighted to find that it wasn't all doom and gloom.
So, of course, Stephen, I think I'm right in saying that when sex was decriminalised in England and Wales between men, the armed services weren't included. Is that right? It was still illegal for the armed services.
Not until 2000.
Yep.
It did take a long time. There was virulent homophobia right up until then, but in the armed services. But under fire during the Second World War, it's the same. I don't want to go on, but for Black servicemen and women that came from the Caribbean and Africa and supported the war effort, they were allowed in, they were embraced, they were supported, and then in 1945 go home. And it was the same for gay men. We don't want to talk about it anymore, and the arrests that had gone down during the war suddenly went through the roof.
Isn't it one of those stories where, much to everybody's surprise, in environments that are quite contained, sometimes very, very controlled, but in which a kind of culture of solidarity, life and death sometimes, means that people discover feelings about each other that in other circumstances that are more relaxed, that are not stressed, actually, and where prevailing orthodox culture prevails, in those environments, I think we know actually that people discover, to their surprise, love and desire. It's like prison, it's like hospitals, it's like these quite contained spaces where very intimate encounters happen. Mm-hmm. People are sleeping in the same dormitories, they're witnessing each other under terrible stress, in great need, in contexts often of just huge heroism, or just ordinary, good, exemplary service. And they somehow escape, you know, or see through, find little nooks and crannies to get through the prohibitions that would have in another moment inhibited them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And overall, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that in wartime, bullets and bombs didn't discriminate.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right in what you're saying, but a lot of it was to do with, well, bombs and bullets are not going to discriminate. You know, any of us could die at any moment and be killed. So there was a lot of that, throwing caution to the wind as well.
Yeah.
Do we know how many of those, do we know from their stories how many of those people, I don't know how to phrase this, but went on to be gay? Or were they, as B was talking about, situationally gay? Because I'm thinking, as a prison governor, there's a term called jail gay, where people, and it's quite genuine, you know, people have love affairs, sexual affairs in prison with other men or other women, but they were never gay before and never after. But it still doesn't take away from the genuineness of what they felt while they were in prison. And I wondered if we knew anything about that.
There was an autobiography written a few years back, and forgive me, I can't remember his name, but he called himself the oldest gay in the Brighton village, and he's probably still alive. He was in his 90s when he wrote the book, and he was straight during the war and married after the war, had children after the war, but didn't come out as gay until recent times, and wrote this wonderful autobiography. I mention him in the book, but yes, absolutely, that he did encounter same-sex relationships during the Second World War, but it wasn't until much later in life he had the confidence to be himself and to be open and honest about it. I think after his wife had passed away.
There's a very interesting book called The Poisoned Bowl. I don't know whether you've read that, which is revisiting men who went to public schools and who went and fought in the wars, and it's there, and they're ostensibly all straight men, or some are gay and some are not, and it's their stories of how it began, their pashes, school, and their pashes during the wars. And if you track it down, I can't remember the name of the author, but it's called The Poisoned Bowl. And it's well worth a read. It's a staggering. It really opens your eyes.
And I also, not in the book, but I recently, this month, February, if you buy Britain at War magazine, which usually is kind of militaristic, I write about lesbians as well, gay men and lesbians in the Second World War, because I had found stories, not enough for the book. I didn't want to do it in the book. That's a few years back, but when they asked me to write an article on the subject for Britain at War magazine, I included some of the women's stories as well, because they're not well known either.
I mean, I said to an extent Sarah Waters in The Night Watch, didn't she, when she talked about, they weren't serving military people, but they were, you know, civil defence and so on. So
yeah, and there's the great story of the woman who appears in American kind of recruitment propaganda, called, was it Phyllis or Phillida, or I think it's Phyllis, Audrey. Anyway, she's this fantastic image of a woman who's kind of lithe and uniformed, and with another woman who's also lithe and uniformed, a bit like you, my dear. And except you haven't got a uniform. Well, you've got a uniform. Anyway, so the thing was, they were adverts for women joining up into the auxiliary, I think, probably the women's auxiliary. And she's gay, and the other woman in the picture is her partner. Little did the world know. Fabulous.
Seen a lot in chat there about the fact that the guy's name in Brighton is George, and he's still alive. Someone saw him yesterday. So.
George,
oh,
that's it. Yeah.
That's lovely. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to press on to question 8. If I can get that one ready. So question 8 is, which country was the first in the world to legalize same-sex marriage following a referendum? Was it A, the Netherlands, D, Denmark, C, Norway, D, Canada, or E, Ireland. How familiar are you all with when different countries legalized same-sex marriage?
Well, I think the key thing here is the referendum thing. And so, although it was pretty late, I think they were the first to do it following a referendum. They were the first to public vote. I might be wrong, but that's the way I'm reading. I think you could read the question two different ways. But I think Ireland were the first to do it following a public vote. But could be wrong. If anyone else knows better, I
think you might be right.
Greater knowledge.
I think it's Ireland.
I think it's Ireland, James. Yeah.
From the team is Ireland, so we'll end that and see what everyone else has said. So yeah, 40% of the audience agree with you and are correct. It is Ireland. Denmark, I think, is earliest at 1988. Well, partnerships in 1988. So yeah, Denmark and Netherlands were kind of early ones, but yeah, Ireland was the first to do it following a public referendum. And obviously we're familiar with, or well, there's a lot in the news that Australia also kind of did the referendum before passing it there. I mean, did any of you follow anything like those referendums?
Well, I followed the Irish one. I mean, I'll never forget. It was the most marvellous thing. You know, here's a country emerging out of a horrible, patriarchal, sexist theocracy, and they have this referendum, and people aren't, you know, they're buying tickets from Philadelphia and Detroit to make sure that they get there to vote, and their mums and dads voted, and it revealed something about Ireland that wasn't just about its kind of emergence into modernity, but a kind of secret life that was much more tolerant and engaged with and knew about a gay experience than anybody could have calculated. It was an extraordinary thing.
It was, yeah.
Magical, actually.
Someone in the chat as well saying they were there in the forecourt of the castle when they watched the whole map of Ireland turn green.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Lovely, lovely.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
I think with the various countries that do have same-sex marriage, much would have been different in terms of how soon it would have happened if they had gone with referendums, or whether that would have pushed stuff later in some cases if they'd gone with a referendum and kind of asked the public their thoughts on it.
Yeah, interesting.
I suspect it's a mixed bag. You know, there'll be somewhere legislation has led thought and somewhere legislation has lagged behind thought. And I think clearly in Ireland, that's what was happening, that public opinion was ahead of legislation. But I would guess in the countries where it happened really early, legislation was leading thought. But, you know, I don't know. Bev Jackson is from the Netherlands. She can
Not every answer is Bev Jackson.
You know she's our lesbian overlord, James, so it's Karen, mention her every 5 minutes.
Okay. Question 9. That's popped up. So question 9, when was homosexuality no longer a criminal offence in the UK? Was it A, 1958, B, 1967, C, 1974, D, 1980, or E, 1982? Anyone want to hazard a guess at that?
67.
67.
No, it's not. It's not 67 because that says the UK, and Scotland didn't outlaw it. I don't think it became okay in Scotland until 1982.
It was quite late, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, I think Northern Ireland was about the same time, but certainly it wasn't legal in Scotland until 1982. So I think this is a wee trick question to see if you horrible imperialists are paying attention. Where's my flag?
Partial.
Are you in the UK?
Get your flag. Get your flag.
Hanging by a thread, as we say here. Hanging by a thread.
Final answer from the team. What are we saying for the team? Are you going with D or E, did you say? Do you think?
1967 it was partial decriminalisation, but
So
It wasn't full decriminalisation.
this is the result of what the audience thought. So almost 70% went with B, 1967, and a bit of a split on the rest. So 1967 was the Sexual Offences Act that covered England and Wales. Scotland wasn't until 1980 with the Criminal Justice Scotland Act. And then there was the Homosexual Offences Northern Ireland Order in 1982. So for the whole of the UK, it wasn't until 1982. So the correct answer there is E, 1982.
Vicious trick question.
It was, wasn't
Yes.
it?
Vicious.
Yes.
It's making us all look stupid.
Yes.
It does.
I mean, Rona, obviously you
This is rigged. This is rigged.
Rigged.
Make sure,
Totally rigged.
and it's rigged to make sure that Rona, who is a friend of a certain
Not that kind of.
wins.
I mean, Rona did get the date wrong about when it was decriminalised in
casting my
Scotland,
character here.
but was where. I mean, Rona, as a resident Scot on the panel, how and what was the kind of conversation in this kind of area around the difference and kind of such a time lag between England and Wales legislation and in Scotland?
I don't know, I was only 11.
It's something to do with Lulu.
I genuinely don't remember anything about it at the time. Seriously, even though I wasn't even out at the time. I don't even think I was out as a lesbian at the time. But no, I was just. But I was still really struggling with my fundamentalist Christian past and the exorcism and everything. Before Jeanette wrote about me in Oranges Not the Only Fruit. I honestly don't remember. But the thing was.
Lorraine would have covered it in the morning.
Yeah, they would have. But remember, Scotland was still quite in the grip of Presbyterianism at that point, and even more so out in the islands where they had, things like the Free Church and the United Free Church and the People's Free Church of Stornoway and the Stornoway People's Free Church. So there was. I think Scotland was very conservative with a small c.
Not to mention Celtic.
Well, I know. By the way, Rangers are winning tonight in Europe. I've got somebody to know it for me just in case MD's really interested. Oh, I think England was a lot more liberal in those days, even though they voted Tory when we never did. But
Yeah.
Freedom.
So we'll move on to question 10. Question 10. Who was the woman at the inaugural meeting of the Gay Liberation Front at the London School of Economics in 1970? Was it A, Sue Sanders, B, Germaine Greer, C, Bev Jackson, D, Sandy Toksvig, or E, Rosie Boycott?
That'll be Germaine Greer, surely. Sue Sanders wouldn't be old enough. She'd kill you if she knew she was in this.
Assuming she's not in the audience.
It was Bev the lady.
Bev
Jackson.
Bev.
I mean, I hate to say this and don't throw eggs at me, but I've never heard of Bev Jackson. Educate me.
So,
no, I'm from Peckham. People in Peckham never hear of these people. I've heard of Germaine Greer, and I don't like Sandy.
You're such a boy. Honestly.
Well, yeah, I am, but I'm being honest.
No,
it sounds like someone I'd be really interested to know about.
She's as dull as ditch water. God, what a boring cow. Oh, there she is! Oh, God!
Bev, if you want to mute yourself.
Hello.
Say hello. This is Bev Jackson. Given that Rona's given a few hints, it could be Bev Jackson earlier on in the other questions. Welcome, Bev. Bev, do you want to introduce yourself for those who don't know you?
Well, I am one of the LGB Alliance. Together with Kate Harris, we founded LGB Alliance in October 2019. And so, yeah, going strong. We've got now 15 different... oh no, shouldn't have, maybe that's one of the questions. I shouldn't have told you. 50 LGBT alliances throughout the world, and yeah, it's great to see. And this is great to watch. And thank you for making me the answer to so many questions.
now that you're here, you can tell us about that fateful evening in October 1970 at the London School of Economics.
Well, I had seen I'd seen a poster saying first meeting of the Gay Liberation Front, and I didn't know what it meant, but it sounded quite exciting. So and I went to this room, and there were 19 men, and there was me, and so I was voted onto the steering group because they wanted to have a woman, and that was it. And I became the spokesperson for the Gay Liberation Front first demo, which was in November 1970. And I said it's important to know that we're not ashamed to be homosexual, and unfortunately 50 years later we have to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Which is
Yes.
not so funny, but anyway. Okay, I'm going to go back into obscurity now. So
that was such a treat. What a treat.
Is it true that you shoved Sappho's male lover off a cliff in a fit of pizza?
Be complete with special guest appearances as well. What more could you want?
Joan Collins, are you really going to have Joan Collins?
Not one of the answers to the question, but so we've got a couple more questions and we've got 10 minutes left, so we'll see if we can get through a few more. Let's launch this one. Question 11. There's going to be a challenge on me pronouncing names now. So, who was the first openly lesbian, gay, or bisexual elected head of government? Was it Elio de Rupo in Belgium, Xavier Bettel of Luxembourg, Johanna Sigurðardóttir of Iceland, Leo Varadkar of Ireland, or Per Christian Foss of Norway?
I've only heard of Leo.
Any of
Johanna.
Johanna. Yeah,
Yeah.
C.
Yeah, I think the Norwegian guy actually, did he not come out as gay once he was in office? I think he was earlier, but Johanna was gay, lesbian, and stood, you know, not stood as a lesbian for election, unlike Bev the Les for Prez. That was her slogan for the LSU. It was Bev the Les for Prez. So I think it was Johanna.
Yeah.
See what the audience say.
Yes.
So yes, 70.
Yay!
Iceland.
Yeah, so Johanna was in 2009. Was the first openly lesbian head of government rather than head of state. Per Christian Foss, you mentioned, Rona. What were you mentioning there about him?
I think he was early, but did he not come out as gay either while he was in office or just after?
So in 2002, he was the so earlier, but he was a temporary. I don't know if he was temporary prime minister or emergency prime minister for a short period of time and was already out. So he was the first head of national government, but he wasn't elected to the position. So that's kind of the difference.
And I must say, I don't think Johanna's had enough credit for introducing that big party pack of olive oils that you can get to Iceland. I think that's...
And the fish fingers. I do like his fish fingers.
Lovely, lovely.
I mean, were any of you familiar with any of the other names? I suppose it depends on how European you
Only the Irish one, because I saw him on the telly, and my sister, when I went to see my sister in Ireland, and the whole family went, he's gay, he's gay, he's gay. They all got Peckham accents, but they're all in Ireland.
Okay, question 12. Oh, what's that one? So, in 1921, why did Parliament reject attempts to add a clause to the Criminal Law Amendment Act to make sexual acts between women illegal? Was it A, Parliament was mostly made up of men and they weren't really bothered about lesbians? B, Queen Victoria didn't believe in lesbians? C, the separate legal personhood of woman had not yet been established? D, they thought it might encourage women to explore their sexuality? There isn't an E on this one because I ran out of trying to find funny answers for this. So, what do we think, panel?
I'm sure I've heard D, but I might be wrong. I'm sure I've heard that in relation to something.
You're right, Stephen. Most unaccountably, this was a bill introduced by Mr. McQuiston, who was the Tory MP for Springburn North in Glasgow. And if you've ever been to Springburn, that will blow your socks off that they could ever have elected a Tory. It's unbelievable. So Springburn North, which is northeast Glasgow, and he introduced it, and it was overturned by the House of Lords because they thought it would give women ideas. And somebody actually said 999 women out of 1,000 have never heard of lesbian sexual acts. The other 1,000 was on the rooftop of the House of Commons screaming and shouting about it.
Yeah, 46% of the audience went with option D, and that's correct. That was, as Rona's just summarised, the conversation that happened in the Lords.
Well, that makes up for me not knowing who Bev Jackson was.
The,
was there that day. She actually abseiled down and then tied herself to Sue Lawley's chair. It was fabulous.
A few people went for the Queen Victoria didn't believe in lesbians. She'd been dead 20 years by this point, or more than that. But the act that it was amending, that was kind of a part of the myth for the original act about, it was something that Queen Victoria didn't believe in. There's not any kind of verification of that though. So that's that. And then we've got a last bonus question, question 13. So launch. So which famous gay man was killed in an air raid on the 8th of March 1941? And Stephen, you need to not answer this because I know you know the answer.
8th of March, 80th anniversary coming up.
Was it A, Ken Snake Hips Johnson, who's a band leader, B, Hugh Binky Beaumont, who's a theatre impresario, C, Noel Coward, who's a playwright, D, Police Sergeant Harry Daly, or E, R.C. Sheriff, who's an author? So apart from Stephen, the rest of the panel, are those any names you're familiar with, and has it a guess as to who that person was?
I think A.
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 Oh, because of the bomb that hit the Cafe Royale, James.
Yeah, I think band leader is the clear. I could be totally wrong, but I have a sneaking suspicion it's Snake Hips Johnson.
Final answer from the panel.
I could be wrong.
Go with that. B, do you know B?
No idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
Just half the audience have gone with B, Hugh Binky Beaumont. 29% of the audience have gone with Ken Snake Hips Johnson, and 29% of the audience and the panel are correct. That's who it was. And
who was it? Who was it?
Ken Snake Hips Johnson. He was about, well, I shall let Stephen.
Oh, it was it. Yes, it was him.
Yeah. There's a picture of him in my latest book, Under Fire, Black Britain in Wartime. And it wasn't the Cafe Royal, it was the Cafe de Paris.
Right, okay.
He was only 26 years old. He was from Guyana.
Yeah.
Lovely, lovely story.
Yeah.
Read about him in my latest book.
I think that's 3 latest books you've shown us tonight, at least.
Check out my website.
I mean, I've obviously looked at some of the stuff that you'd sent me, Stephen, for some of these questions, and there's several of the books that kind of contain this kind of history. I think it's
so he knows all the answers.
You know, yeah.
Oh no,
yeah.
No. Only the ones from my books.
So that's all of our questions. So thank you, team. What was most surprising for you in the questions we've covered tonight? Was there anything from our history that you kind of didn't know at all, or really surprised by?
Brenda Howard. For me, Brenda Howard was the surprising. That was, I thought, fascinating because I really didn't know anything about that, and I that alone I'm grateful for because it was really interesting.
As well as the one about. They might, if they changed the law, or if they specified lesbians, women might get ideas. But good.
Yeah.
I think for me it was that Bev Jackson threw the first brick at Stonewall. I didn't.
And I'm just thankful to have been seriously introduced to Bev Jackson, who I had never heard of. So, you learn something new every day, and I'm glad she's participating, and I hope she's not offended that I'd never heard of her, but I'm glad I have now. Because
that was the treat of the evening. That was the real surprise treat of the evening.
I'll sign you up for Bev to interview for our YouTube channel another time as well. That'll be really interesting.
It gets worse, Stephen. We haven't even started on Kate Harris.
I know all about Kate Harris. We know all about her in Peckham.
Well, it just remains for me to thank you all for being in the pub tonight. My pint is empty, so I think that is time to head back to the bar. You've been a fantastically entertaining team. I would love to be in a pub quiz with you all anywhere, anytime. Thank you all for watching and for responding. We're going to tot up all the results after the webinar and contact whoever's got the highest score, or pick someone at random from the high scores for kind of all the goodies. One of Stephen's books, a signed copy of one of Stephen's books, is in the prize bundle.
Stephen's wrote a book.
Did he not mention that?
Did he? No.
But that's how you get on podcasts and TV, James. Everybody has to have a book these days. I mean, come on.
So, until next month for our gay spot in March, thank you all very much, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, panel.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
I've loved it. I've really enjoyed it.
Lovely.